The soft hum of cryocore station was a constant, like the heartbeat of the facility itself. Deep beneath Titan's frozen surface, Dr. Elena Morvan adjusted the visor of her exosuit as she stared at the temporal nexus. The swirling vortex of golden light and fractured shadows seemed to breathe, shifting and twisting as if alive. It was humanity's crowning achievement, a device capable of reaching across time itself. Yet, in the pit of her stomach, something felt deeply wrong. "Elena!" a voice chimed through her comm link. "Are you seeing this anomaly in Sector 4's readings? The energy spikes are off the charts." It was Jorin, her research assistant. Young, eager, and oblivious to the growing weight on Elena's shoulders. "I see it," Elena replied tersely, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Her tone betrayed none of the unease gnawing at her. "Run a diagnostic on the auxiliary stabilizers. We need to rule out internal interference." Jorin's reply crackled in her ear. "Already on it. But doesn't this feel a little too consistent for a hardware glitch?" Elena's chest tightened. Consistent anomalies meant something external, something alive, was interfering. She turned to face the observation deck, her gaze fixed on General Victor Kale. He stood with his arms crossed, his sharp features illuminated by the Nexus's glow. Kale wasn't a man to mince words, and he certainly wasn't one to entertain the notion of shutting down his prized project. She crossed the lab, her boots clinking against the metallic floor. "General Kale," she called out. "We need to pause the experiments. These readings." Kale turned slowly, his expression one of practiced indifference. "Dr. Morvan, I trust you're not about to suggest something reckless like shutting down the Nexus?" "It's not reckless," Elena countered, keeping her voice firm. "It's responsible. The spikes aren't random, they're patterns. Something out there is reacting to the Nexus." Kale arched a brow, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "Patterns? Are you suggesting we're upsetting some cosmic balance?" "Spare me the dramatics, Doctor. This project isn't just science, it's survival. Do you think the alien emissaries will give humanity a seat at the table without leverage?" "Leverage isn't worth the cost if it destroys the table," she shot back. Kale's smirk disappeared. He took a deliberate step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Your job is to refine the Nexus, not moralize about its consequences." The unspoken threat hung in the air as Kale turned on his heel and strode away, leaving Elena fuming. She returned to her console, determined to get answers. Hours later, the lab was quiet except for the faint hum of machinery. Jorin had retired for the night, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. She reviewed the day's data for the 100th time, tracing the energy spikes and comparing them to old test logs. The patterns weren't just consistent, they were intelligent. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Elena flinched and spun around. A tall figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim corridor light. Its elongated limbs and shimmering, translucent skin marked it as an alien, a Silith emissary. "Lutherix," she said, recognizing the technician assigned to the project. "You shouldn't be here after hours." "Neither should you," Lutherix replied, its voice melodic yet tinged with concern. It stepped closer, its glassy eyes reflecting the glow of her console. "But I see why you are." Elena hesitated. She hadn't trusted the Silith. They were too cryptic, too detached from humanity's plight. Yet now, she saw something in Lutherix's expression that made her pause. "You know what's causing the spikes, don't you?" she asked. Lutherix's thin lips pressed into a line. "Your Nexus," it said, gesturing toward the glowing vortex, "does not merely reach into time. It tears at the threads that bind existence. We warned your leaders of this. But your General Kale does not listen. He only commands." The words hit Elena like a blow. "Tears at the threads. Are you saying we're causing damage?" "Not just damage," Lutherix said gravely. "Extinction. The ripples of your experiments are unraveling ecosystems on other worlds. Lives blink out of existence with each activation." Her heart sank. She'd suspected the project had risks, but not on this scale. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," Lutherix said, stepping closer. You are the only human who listens. The following morning, Elena sat at her workstation, staring at the encrypted files Lutherix had slipped to her before vanishing into the shadows. She decrypted the first file, her hands trembling as diagrams and reports flooded the screen. The Nexus wasn't just experimental, it was weaponized. Hidden subroutines in the system's code hinted at military applications, ones that could selectively target and erase future probabilities. This is insane, she muttered. Talking to yourself again? Elena looked up to see Jorin standing in the doorway, holding 2 steaming cups. He handed her one with a grin. Thought you could use some caffeine. You look like you've been up all night. I have, she said, taking the cup. And I found something. Jorin leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. What am I looking at? Evidence, Elena said. The Nexus isn't just a time experiment. It's a weapon. They're planning to rewrite entire futures. Jorin's smile faded. Elena, you can't just... I'm not staying silent, Jorin. She interrupted, her voice resolute. We're playing God with lives we can't even see. This has to stop. Before he could reply, the lab's alarms blared to life. A mechanical voice echoed through the facility. Unauthorized data access detected. Security en route. Elena's blood ran cold. They know, she whispered. Jorin grabbed her arm. We have to move, now. She hesitated, her gaze darting between the console and the door. But there was no time. Grabbing a portable drive, she copied as much data as she could before following Jorin out of the lab. As they sprinted down the corridor, Elena's mind raced. Kale would stop at nothing to protect the Nexus. She'd seen his ruthlessness firsthand. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone, human and alien alike, who would pay the price for humanity's arrogance. By the time they reached the escape hatch leading to the auxiliary wing, footsteps echoed behind them. Elena turned, her breath hitching as General Kale's voice rang out. Dr. Morven! Stop where you are! Elena locked eyes with Kale, defiance burning in her gaze. You don't understand what you're playing with, Kale. Oh, I understand perfectly, he replied, his weapon trained on her. The question is, do you? The auxiliary wing of Cryocore Station was a labyrinth of maintenance tunnels and storage bays, far from the pristine labs and bustling observation decks above. Dr. Elena Morven and Jorin pressed themselves into a shadowy alcove, their breaths shallow as heavy boots echoed down the metal corridor. They've locked the station down, Jorin whispered, his face pale under the flickering emergency lights. What's the plan? Elena clutched the portable drive against her chest. We need to get this data out, she said. The truth has to reach the outer council. Without external oversight, Kale will bury this. Jorin hesitated. You know what they'll do if they catch us, right? They won't just fire us. They'll make sure we disappear. Then we can't let them catch us, she said firmly. Come on. They slipped through the shadows, ducking under a deactivated drone and weaving through crates labeled with alien glyphs. Cryocore's lower levels were less monitored than the labs, but that didn't mean they were safe. Elena knew Kale's men would sweep every corner of the station to find her. A low chirping noise made her freeze. Jorin looked down at his wristband, panic flickering across his face. They've hacked into our IDs. We're tagged. Disable it, Elena hissed. I can't, Kale's encryption is too advanced, he muttered, frantically tapping at his screen. It's only a matter of time before they pinpoint us. Before she could respond, a soft voice drifted from the shadows. Your kind's reliance on primitive technology is fascinating. Elena spun around to see Lutherix emerging from a side corridor, its shimmering skin faintly reflecting the emergency lights. How did you find us? She asked, tension tightening her voice. The alien tilted its head, the gesture oddly graceful. I did not need to find you. You are predictable. It is why I remain here to assist. Elena frowned. Why would you help us? If Kale finds out. Kale already suspects me. Lutherix interrupted, its tone calm but resolute. "But my loyalty is not to this station. It is to what remains of existence. Your actions here will determine the fate of many worlds, including mine." Jorin glanced nervously between Elena and the alien. "Do you trust it?" "No," she said bluntly. "But we don't have a choice. Lutherix, can you get us past Kale's security?" "I can," it replied, holding up a small device that emitted a faint hum. "This will mask your tags temporarily. But if we are to succeed, we must act swiftly." With Lutherix leading the way, the trio made their way to the secure data hub. The corridors grew colder and darker as they descended, the station's hum now punctuated by the occasional creak of shifting metal. "Elena," Jorin whispered, "how do you plan to get the Council's attention? They don't exactly take anonymous tips seriously." "They will if it comes with irrefutable proof," she replied. "We need access to Kale's private logs. That's where the real evidence will be, communications, orders, everything." Jorin let out a low whistle. "You're ambitious. I'll give you that." Lutherix stopped abruptly, raising a long, slender arm to signal silence. Ahead, the faint glow of a security drone illuminated the corridor. It hovered in place, scanning methodically with its multi-lensed eye. Elena's pulse quickened. "Can you disable it?" she whispered. "I can," Lutherix said, holding up its device. "But only for a brief moment. Be ready to move." The alien pressed a button, and the drone's light flickered, its whirring briefly ceasing. Elena and Jorin darted past it, Lutherix close behind. As soon as they rounded the corner, the drone's hum resumed, its search continuing unaware. The data hub loomed ahead, a thick, reinforced door marked with cryocore's insignia. Elena approached the control panel, her hands moving quickly over the interface. "It's biometrically locked," she muttered. "Allow me," Lutherix said, stepping forward. Its translucent fingers extended thin, needle-like filaments that slid into the panel's access port. Sparks flew, and the door hissed open. Inside, the hub was a stark contrast to the rest of the station, brightly lit and immaculately clean. Rows of servers hummed softly, their displays casting eerie reflections on the polished floor. Jorin exhaled. "All right, we're in. What's next?" "Download everything," Elena said. "Logs, files, blueprints, anything we can use to expose Kale." As she connected her drive to the central console, a stream of data flooded the screen. Each file was a puzzle piece, painting a damning picture of Cryocore's operations. One document caught her eye. Operation Dominance Protocol. Her stomach churned as she skimmed the file. It outlined plans to use the Nexus to erase alien resistance before it could ever form, reshaping the future to secure humanity's supremacy. "This is monstrous," she whispered. Jorin leaned over her shoulder. "If the Council sees this, they won't have a choice but to shut Cryocore down," she finished. Suddenly, a sharp alarm blared through the room. Red lights flashed, and a robotic voice announced, "Unauthorized access detected. Security personnel en route." Lutherix turned to them, its expression unreadable. "You have what you need. We must leave now." Elena yanked the drive from the console, shoving it into her pocket. "Jorin, go with Lutherix. I'll create a distraction." "What?" Jorin's eyes widened. "Are you insane? Kale knows I'm the one he wants," she said. "If I stay, you have a chance to get out and deliver this to the Council." Jorin hesitated, his face torn with conflict. "Elena! Go!" she snapped. Lutherix placed a hand on Jorin's shoulder. "She is correct. This is her fight. We must ensure her sacrifice is not in vain." Reluctantly, Jorin nodded. "Don't do anything stupid," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Elena forced a smile. "Stupid's my specialty. Now go." As they disappeared into the shadows, Elena turned back to the console. She activated a command that sent the servers into overdrive, causing them to spark and hum with escalating energy. The door burst open, and Kale strode in, flanked by armed guards. His cold gaze locked onto her. Dr. Morvan, he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. Step away from the console. Elena straightened, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. You're too late, Kale. The truth is out. Kale's smirk returned. You think exposing this will stop humanity's progress? You're naive, Doctor. Progress is built on sacrifice. And what you're doing isn't progress, she retorted. It's annihilation. Kale raised his weapon, his expression hardening. I gave you a chance to be part of history. Now you'll be its footnote. Elena took a step back, her fingers hovering over a final command. History remembers those who stand for what's right. Goodbye, General. She hit the button, and the room erupted in a blinding flash as the servers overloaded. The emergency sirens blared throughout Cryocore Station, their piercing wails blending with the sound of crackling electricity from the overloaded servers. Smoke thickened the air, and the acrid scent of burning metal stung Elena's nose. She crouched behind a terminal, her lungs heaving, as Kale's guards scrambled to regain control of the room. Find her! Kale's voice thundered over the chaos. Elena clutched the drive in her pocket, her mind racing. She had to find a way out, but first, she needed to buy Jorin and Lutherix enough time to escape. The console she'd sabotaged sparked again, the overload spreading to nearby systems. A conduit burst overhead, raining sparks onto the guards below. Systems failing in primary nexus chamber, the automated voice of Cryocore announced. Kale's attention snapped to the intercom, his features tightening. Shut down the nexus protocols immediately! A guard shook his head. We've lost control, sir. The failsafe has been overridden. Elena's lips curled into a grim smile. She hadn't just sabotaged the data hub, she'd set the nexus itself into an unstable state. If Kale wanted control, he'd have to fix it himself. Pull all personnel to the nexus chamber, Kale ordered. No one leaves until we stabilize it. The guards began filing out, and Elena used the distraction to slip through a side door. Her every step echoed in the narrow maintenance corridor as she made her way toward the central chamber. The drive in her pocket felt heavier with each step, a burden of responsibility she couldn't shake. The Nexus chamber was in chaos when she arrived. Scientists and technicians scrambled at their stations, shouting over the rising hum of the device. The vortex in the center of the room was no longer stable. Its once golden light flickered with angry red streaks, and the air vibrated with a low, menacing frequency. Kale stood at the main console, barking orders. If we can't stabilize it, we lose everything. Divert all auxiliary power! General, a technician stammered. If we push the system any further, it could implode. Then find another way! Kale snarled, slamming his fist against the console. Elena stayed hidden behind a support pillar, watching the scene unfold. Her heart pounded as she weighed her options. She could slip away now, let the Nexus destabilize and take Kale's plans down with it. But that would mean risking the lives of everyone on the station, and the surrounding alien ecosystems still connected to the temporal disruptions. She couldn't let that happen. Elena stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. Kale, stop! The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Kale's expression darkened. You've got some nerve, Doctor, he said, his tone dripping with venom. What's your play here? I'm here to fix your mess, she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. Kale laughed bitterly. Fix it? You caused it! I warned you this would happen, Elena shot back. The Nexus wasn't ready for this level of stress. You ignored the risks, and now it's spiraling out of control. Kale's hand hovered near the holstered weapon at his side. And why should I trust you now? Because I'm the only one who understands how to stabilize it, she said, her voice firm. You can shoot me, Kale, but that won't stop this chamber from collapsing, and taking you with it. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Kale gestured sharply toward the console. You have 5 minutes, Doctor. If you can't fix it, I'll consider it treason. Elena didn't respond. She rushed to the console, her hands flying over the holographic controls. The Nexus's readings were worse than she'd expected, Energy levels were spiking dangerously, and the containment field was on the verge of collapse. "You can't stabilize it alone," a voice said softly beside her. She turned to see Lutherix, its glassy eyes filled with urgency. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "I followed you," it replied simply. "Your actions are reckless, but your intentions are noble. I will help." Elena hesitated, then nodded. "I need you to reroute the energy feedback loop. If we can dissipate the excess energy into the auxiliary cores, we might be able to contain the collapse." Lutherix moved swiftly to a secondary console, its long fingers gliding over the controls with precision. "This will buy us time, but it will not solve the underlying instability." "I know," Elena said grimly. "But it's all we've got." As they worked, the Nexus roared louder, the vortex spinning faster and spewing streaks of raw energy. Cale watched from the other side of the room, his fingers twitching with impatience. "Time's up, Morven!" he barked. "What's the status?" Elena didn't look up. "We're close. Just hold on." "Not good enough," Cale snapped. He turned to his guards. "Prepare to shut it down manually." "No!" Elena shouted, her voice cracking. "If you interrupt the process now, the entire system will implode. You'll kill us all." Cale's eyes narrowed. "And if you're lying? Then you'll die anyway," she said bluntly. Cale hesitated, his jaw tightening. Finally, he waved his guards back. "You've got 1 minute." Elena exchanged a quick glance with Lutherix. "We need to finish this now," she said. "Agreed," the alien replied. "Prepare to initiate the dispersion sequence." Elena entered the final commands, her fingers trembling. The console beeped in warning, displaying a countdown as the energy rerouting began. "Containment field stabilizing," the automated voice announced. The Nexus's light dimmed slightly, its violent spinning slowing. Relief washed over Elena as the readings returned to safer levels. "It's working," she said softly. But before she could fully exhale, the console flashed a new warning. "Critical energy spike detected." Her stomach dropped. "No, no, no." Lutherix glanced at the readings. "The damage to the system is too severe. The Nexus cannot sustain itself." Elena turned to Cale. "We have to shut it down permanently." Cale's face twisted in rage. "We've come too far to give up now. If you don't shut it down, the entire station will be destroyed," she shouted. "Is that the legacy you want?" Cale froze, the weight of her words sinking in. His shoulders slumped slightly, but his face remained hard. "Do it," he growled. Elena and Lutherix moved quickly, entering the shutdown commands. The Nexus's light flickered and dimmed, its hum fading into silence. When it was over, the room was eerily quiet. Cale stood motionless, his expression unreadable. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice low and cold. "No," Elena replied, meeting his gaze. "But it's a start." As she left the chamber, the weight of her actions settled over her. The data she carried was a lifeline, not just for humanity, but for every civilization threatened by Cryocore's hubris. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope.